Sometimes it's hard to talk about Avengers Endgame without revealing spoilers, but in this case it's impossible, so just know that there are going to be some serious Endgame spoilers starting right now. We said goodbye to some great heroes who sacrificed themselves to save the day. Although we're still mourning the losses of Tony Stark and Natasha Romanoff, we're ready to talk about their journeys through the MCU. We'll also tell you what their sacrifices really meant. Going into Avengers Endgame, it didn't take a prophetic vision to know that not everyone was going to make it out alive. Not only were our heroes going up against the biggest, baddest villain the MCU had ever known, but there was the little matter of the Soul Stone. In Avengers Infinity War, we learned that the Soul Stone requires a soul for a soul trade in order for someone to take possession of it. Man, you really can't escape those annoying microtransactions anywhere, can ya? Thanos tossed his favorite daughter Gamora off the cliffs of Vormir in order to take the Soul Stone, and we assumed a similar sacrifice would have to be made at some point in Avengers Endgame. We knew someone would have to perish, but the only question was who. Many fans guessed that either Tony Stark or Steve Rogers would lose their life in exchange for the Soul Stone. Instead, we saw old and recently reunited friends Clint Barton and Natasha Romanoff heading to Vormir for this dangerous mission. As one would expect of a confrontation between two friends and superheroes, there was a dramatic struggle over who was going to sacrifice themselves. And ultimately, Natasha won. Well, she won, but not really, since she did end up dying at the bottom of a cliff. It's like the honor of being Thanos' favorite child. Black Widow sacrificing herself to save the day wasn't something we saw coming, but maybe we should have. According to actress Scarlett Johansson, portraying Black Widow on the big screen has been a very transformative decade. Many fans lament that her character was poorly handled when she first entered the MCU, and it seems Johansson agrees with that assessment. She claims her introduction in Iron Man 2 made her look like a souped-up secretary with a skill set on the side. But going into Endgame, Johansson claims she felt confident about the character and reveals Natasha's primary motivation is redemption. In Age of Ultron, Natasha talks about her past and the terrible things she did when she was commanded to. Becoming an Avenger and a hero was her way of trying to redeem herself for all the terrible things she's done, and we see that this is true in Endgame. When following the decimation, Natasha is dedicated to keeping the planet safe and making sure her fellow heroes are still doing their jobs. Even when her peers falter, Natasha isn't even close to giving up because she's figured out who she is, and that's a hero. Johansson adds that Natasha finally discovered her own self-worth, which makes her sacrifice all the more meaningful. Not only did our heroes lose a friend and a strong warrior, but they also lost someone who had kept them together through some insanely difficult times. It was a massive loss, and forced other characters to step up. It really drove home the point that she had been sacrificing far before she leapt from that cliff. After the decimation, Thor was overcome with depression. Clint becomes a vigilante, and Tony and Steve refuse to talk about their feelings. Not only does Natasha take on a difficult job, but she also takes on a lot of emotional labor, which goes largely unnoticed until she's gone. In fact, there are many fans who feel that Natasha's last moments were a serious regression of her character. Sure, we know that she loves Clint Barton and feels grateful to him for sparing her life all those years ago. But as she sacrifices herself, her words seem to imply that she believes Clint has more to live for because he has a family. She must not have known that one of his kids puts ketchup on his hot dogs, or she wouldn't have been so confident about Clint's child-raising skills. Natasha has plenty of close relationships, and she's taken a ton of responsibility since the decimation. Is her life worth more than Clint's? And while she's trying to make the world better, Clint was taking out his anger and grief to such an extent that even his old pals like Rhodey didn't want to be near him. Considering their history and personalities, it's not a surprise at all that Natasha and Clint tussled to see who was going to sacrifice themselves for the Soul Stone. But many are shocked that Marvel Studios let Natasha win and feel it was disrespectful to a character who struggled so much to be represented. In fact, it does seem like this was more of a business decision than a narrative one. We know Black Widow is finally going to get her own movie, and many have suspected it'll be a prequel. In fact, when she arrives on Vormir, Red Skull reveals her father's name, which Natasha admitted she didn't know. This seemed like a bright neon sign that Marvel Studios was trying to get us hyped about learning more about Natasha's past. We mean, obviously it worked, but you're not fooling us, and Jeremy Renner is working on a series about Hawkeye to launch on the new Disney streaming service. Natasha's sacrifice was certainly a shocking moment that drove home how high the stakes were to the audience. It made sense that her character would give her own life up to save Clint, but it seems like a pretty cold and calculated move by Marvel Studios to have her succeed. Even her last words were more for Clint's benefit than her own, as she said, "Let me go," and comfort him by saying it's okay. And to make matters worse, the loss of Natasha truly paled to the hero who made the much bigger and flashier sacrifice at the end of the movie. But in his defense, that's just kind of Tony Stark's style, so why should his death be any different? Tony Stark not surviving Avengers Endgame was one of the first predictions we made about the movie as soon as Infinity War was over. But that doesn't mean we're happy about it. How dare Marvel Studios give us what we wanted? Not only was Avengers Endgame a great movie, but it was also a great payoff for those of us who've been a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe since the beginning. In fact, there were some moments that just felt like pure fan service, but since we're fans, we're definitely not complaining. Like the scene where Steve Rogers and Tony Stark go back in time in order to retrieve more Pym particles from a young Hank Pym's laboratory. While there, Tony just so happens to run into his father, Howard Stark. It had been established previously that prior to being assassinated by the Winter Soldier, Howard Stark didn't get along very well with his son. Not only were the two always at odds, but Howard was less than affectionate. Tony once lamented that his father never even told him that he loved him. Yet we got this scene where Howard talked about how much he loved his child, even though he wasn't born yet, and how he'd do anything for him. It's a moment Tony could appreciate all the more since he had a kid of his own. It was a sweet, sappy, contrived scene that we just ate up because, come on, we all wanted Tony to hear that his dad loved him at least once. When we first met Tony all the way back in 2008's Iron Man, he was a billionaire bachelor who thought of nobody but himself. Not only did we get to watch him put on a super suit and fight crime, but we saw him become a hero in every sense of the word. And because of this, he won the heart of Pepper Potts and finally got to have a happy family. Seriously, his life was downright idyllic before his old friend showed up blabbing about time travel. We wonder if Pepper Potts ever got her compost pile started. Not only did Tony have an adorable daughter, but he also took Peter Parker under his wing following the events of Captain America: Civil War. One of the most heartbreaking scenes of Infinity War was when Peter died in Tony's arms. He had grown into such an incredible hero, and yet he still cried out in fear as he faded away, and Tony could do nothing to save him. This was what ultimately pushed Tony to risk his happy life in order to undo the decimation. According to actor Robert Downey Jr., he actually didn't get too broken up while they were filming Peter's death in Infinity War. It was just another day at work until he watched the movie with someone else. Seeing their strong reaction to the scene really impacted him and drove home how strongly many people feel towards these characters. We can definitely attest to that fact, and it made it all the more heartbreaking the way Tony's final moments reminded us of when Peter Parker got dusted in the previous movie. Of course, we all know there was the big over-the-top battle with Thanos and pretty much everybody else in the history of the MCU. But despite all of our favorite heroes giving it their all, it still seemed like Thanos was going to emerge victorious. Confident of the odds of his success, Thanos said, "I am inevitable," to which Tony replied, "I am Iron Man," while donning the Infinity Gauntlet and defeating Thanos. We're sure we don't need to remind you that these were the words he uttered at the end of the very first Iron Man movie, but apparently we just did. This line showcases Tony's confidence, and the crazy thing is that it wasn't in the script for the Iron Man movie. Robert Downey Jr. just said the line, and everyone loved it so much they decided to keep it in because it resonated with the audience and made so much sense for his character. Considering it kicked off his journey into the MCU, it's fitting that it was one of the last things he said before his grand exit. It was also great to have something to cheer about right before the great shuddering sobs started. But really, this is a better ending than Tony ever even imagined for himself. In Age of Ultron, Tony had a vision that everyone he knew and cared about was dying, and he was completely powerless to stop it. This was something he had been grappling with since the Battle of New York, and it traumatized him. He was afflicted with panic attacks and driven to create Ultron to try to keep the world safe. But in Avengers Endgame, Tony faced his greatest fear with aliens raining from the sky, a seemingly unstoppable enemy, and his friends in imminent peril. And this time, he was able to face his fears and save the day, even though he knew it meant sacrificing his own life. But that's just the kind of thing Iron Man does. And Tony even has a few brief moments with his loved ones before he fades away. He's able to greet his beloved wife, Pepper Potts, who flew into the battlefield in her rescue armor to help in the battle against Thanos. And of course, Peter Parker's there, as if the scene needed to be just a touch more heartbreaking. The way Tony finally faded away was incredibly similar to the scene in which Peter was dusted in Infinity War, and it's clear this wasn't lost on Peter. Not only did he lose his mentor, but now he too knows what it's like to be helpless to save someone you love. While Endgame concluded the story of Tony Stark, Peter Parker is still alive and has to figure out how this whole superhero thing works. Although Tony won't be around to lecture him and receive updates on how many churros he's eaten, we have no doubt Peter's superhero style will be impacted by his time with Tony Stark. What do you all think about the way we said goodbye to Iron Man and Black Widow? Do you think they got worthy endings, or do you wish things had played out differently? Let us know what you think in the comments section below. Bye for now.